Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a books with a distinct memory attached to them video. Bit of a long title, but the basic gist is if a book left an impact on me, as in I was reading it somewhere in the last 3 to 5 years and I can remember a specific place and a specific scene from the book, then it left an impact on me. So that is the general gist of this video. The first book that I want to talk about, obviously this is going to be spoiler free, but the first book that I want to talk about here is The Hero of Ages, and that is the third book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. If Sanderson wasn't on this list, pretty much everyone would be surprised. Obviously he's one of my favorite authors. I was listening to the end of Hero of Ages on audiobook, and Michael Kramer, the audiobook narrator, took me a while to warm up to him because when he was initially reading The Final Empire, I was getting a bit sleepy. It took me making myself focus in order to start and get invested in the book. So by the third book, I was invested. I was used to his narration, and when I was listening to the ending, Brandon Sanderson tends to do like what's called a Sanderlanche, where he builds everything up to the ending and everything happens in rapid succession. And the ending of Mistborn Era 1 was no exception to that. I remember distinctly driving home from work, listening to the audiobook in my tiny little car, and as I was about to turn right, I had my indicator on and everything. I was just gripping the steering wheel with my mouth open, and I didn't care who could see me through my windows, but the ending of that book was so climactic and so good that I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to it. So that is in essence what this video is going to entail. The next book was on my shelf, so I moved things around so that I can hold it up, and that is Skyward, again by Brandon Sanderson. Not this edition, but the advanced copy I got. It's a purple cover like the US cover. This is the UK cover. I was reading Skyward when I traveled Japan, I think for the first time, because I've been twice, but I distinctly remember having a respiratory infection while reading the end of this, and so that would be my first trip. So I talked about it in my traveling reading vlog when I was in Japan, and to me it just holds such a special place in my memory, not only because I was traveling, but because it's also an advanced proof copy that I had at the time, and so the book hadn't even come out yet. So I couldn't even bring it with me on e-reader or anything. I had to bring the physical copy, and I lugged that book all over Japan with me, and I adored that book. It became one of my favorites. So I did give Skyward a 5 stars. It follows Spencer, and her role is trying to defend the planet against these invading creatures. So not her directly, but her race defending against these invading creatures. So Spencer's goal is to become a pilot, and she really wants to join the pilot academy, but unfortunately her father in the past has abandoned his fleet when he was in the pilot's academy, and so because of that he's been branded a coward. And if you're branded a coward, that is a massive thing in this culture, and everybody looks down upon you and shuns you. So Spencer is very argumentative, quite abrasive, and she fights against this label consistently. And while that affected me and my view of the book for the first 100 or so pages, I really love how Sanderson took this. I really love how he integrated Spencer with the other characters that we got to meet, and I love obviously his world building, which is a standard. I love his world building anyway, but I especially like what he did in here, and everything that he wrote, especially with the spaceships and the battle and everything, I could very much visualize, so he managed to communicate that really well too. So I loved having this with me as a physical thing to read while I was traveling, and I distinctly remember sitting in a hotel room in Sapporo, which is at the top of Japan, and finishing this while I was sick, and then just knowing I had to update a vlog because I loved the ending so much. So this is definitely another one that makes it into my distinct memories list. I now have 2 audiobooks that I want to discuss, and for reasons that I was listening to these on the train and then just burst into tears, I want to include these. Not because they're particularly sad or upsetting books. One is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel, which is the first book in the Themis Files trilogy, adult sci-fi. It's told in an interview format, so multiple narrators as well in the audiobook. It's very unique in an audiobook style, and it was one of the first audiobooks that I ever picked up, which is why I continually tend to push it when I'm saying, hey, get into audiobooks, because it's what I started with and it was a resounding success. So something in that book happened, and it's not that I necessarily burst out into tears, but I did have a very visceral emotional reaction. And also on another occasion, I remember sitting on the tram and barking out a laugh because something happened in the narrative that was very funny and I couldn't control my reaction. So I was this random girl on public transport who just looked into the distance with her headphones in and started laughing at seemingly nothing because only I could hear my audiobook. So that sticks out to me in my memory. The other one is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second book to the Six of Crows duology, and there was a moment in that book that made me cry or made me well up with tears, and I distinctly remember having to concentrate on not crying while I was on a crowded train, because this was at peak hour when I was going to work early in the morning, and so I didn't want to burst into tears surrounded by people on a train when nobody could move away from me and I also couldn't leave. So those are two train incidents where I've been listening to books that I ended up really enjoying. I gave them 4 and 5 stars respectively, and I just can't divorce that from my reading of them. They have such emotional moments that just tend to stick with me. Let me know if you've ever cried in public about a book, because I definitely have had obviously very visceral reactions, and I would like to know that I'm not alone. The next one I want to talk about is the conclusion to the Elderling series by Robin Hobb. It is Assassin's Fate, the last book in her Fits and Fool series, but the last book in her like 14 book long saga of books. I got this from the publisher HarperCollins Australia, and I wasn't expecting to get it from them, and so I ended up getting it early, and that also meant that I felt obligated to finish it as soon as possible, and I think I read it in 2 sittings, and it's at least 800 pages long. It's very, very thick. I don't have a copy on me, unfortunately, but it is a very big book, and I remember not stopping, lying in my bed, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I looked up from the book and just burst into tears. So I'm really glad that nobody was also awake to witness that. Clearly I am a book crier, but I'm not ashamed of that. I cry at movies, I cry at books, I cried everything. It just means that I have a lot of feelings. It's also really hard to describe what Assassin's Fate is about, so I'm just going to link my review to the first book in the Farseer trilogy, which introduces the entirety of the Robin Hobb Elderlings universe. So I'll link that in the description and in the cards for you. This next one is a young adult fantasy, and I think it's the 3rd or 4th book in the Spellslinger series. I know that it's a green book and it's called Soulbinder, and I remember distinctly at halfway, or maybe just under halfway, maybe a third, I had to put the book down, open. I put it down on the bed, open, and I just had to stare at the wall for a minute, because something happened that was such a major plot twist that I just couldn't compute. And so I had to let my brain do the little processing wheel until I got back online again. And then again, I burst into tears and I kept reading. So that is another book that has just made me stare at the wall and have to process my feelings, because it had such a whiplash effect that was very warranted in the plot and didn't take me by surprise in a bad way. It very much seamlessly blended into the story, and it was a suspend my disbelief moment, but also hang on, this is happening moment that was just very flooring. And because of the build up of the characters and the world building up until that point, I believed everything and I understood everything, and it was amazing. So that book stands out in that series for being one of my favorites. So it's a young adult fantasy series that I harp on about quite a lot. It's about a guy named Kellen. He's an underdog, he's a rebel, his culture very much values power, and he is somebody who can't spark his magical bands on his arms for whatever reason. So he's kind of the runt of the litter in that sense. Everybody picks on him because they know they're gonna win, so they know they can seem powerful and they know they can bully and manipulate him. So he has to rely on his own wit and his own sense of self in order to get through dangerous situations where he could die. And I love the found family dynamic in that book, and I love the animal sidekick in that book. It is the best. I love it so much, and it's such a great fantasy quest with such awesome identity development and character growth. So good. And Soulbinder just hit that sweet spot even more, even though the other books in the series have clocked at least a 4, 4.5 or 5 stars from me as well. And then the last two are fairly decent throwbacks, so not so much 3 to 5 years, more when I was in my teens. So this one is actually by Stephanie Meyer, and I didn't hear many people talk about it. They usually talk about Twilight, but here I'm talking about The Host by her, and it's her sci-fi book, and I barely remember it now, but I do remember that I received it for Christmas when I was a teenager, and I was reading this in my room, and I remember sitting in my bed and bawling my eyes out near the end, and my dad opened my door because Christmas lunch was ready, and I saw him realize that I was in tears, clock the fact that it was about a book and that I was actually okay, and then he kind of retreated back through the door like Homer going through the hedges. So that is the connection that I have with The Host. I don't think I have a copy of it anymore, but it does have a place in my memory, and it definitely informed some of my early years of getting into reading. So Stephanie Meyer definitely paved the way in terms of her Twilight book, and with The Host at formulating the beginnings of my reading taste. And then finally, the last one on this list is a book that I buddy read before I knew what buddy reading actually was, thanks to the internet and book booktube and book Twitter. So I buddy read this book with my mum when I was about 16 or 17, and it was very advanced for my reading then because it's memoirs of a geisha, and I know that the geisha, I can't remember her name, which is terrible, but if I remember I'll put it on the screen. I remember that she narrated her story and he voice recorded it, and from those voice recordings he managed to capture her tone, her voice, and her descriptions of everything that had happened in her life. And she didn't want the book published until after her passing, I believe, or after the passing of 2 or 3 significant people in her life. But I remember reading that with my mum, and she finished it before me, so whenever something massive was coming up, she'd always be waiting to see what I was up to. And I distinctly have a vision of me sitting on the beach on a family holiday, and I was reading a part that was closer to the middle, more to the end, and she was kind of over my shoulder looking to see what part I was up to. So reading in a collaborative sense started fairly early for me. I just didn't have a name for it then like I do for it now, which is buddy reading. So those are the books that have distinct moments or distinct memories attached to reading them. I would love to hear some of yours because they could be pretty random, like bursting into tears on the train or in your bed or just on the beach or anywhere, because apparently I cry a lot, but it is all for a good reason. So if you have any down below of your own stories, please let me know. I'd be very interested because I'm always interested in finding new recommendations. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.